Meet our 2021 Rathbones Folio Prize authors.
Life under lockdown has been such a bizarre experience. There have been moments of like illumination where ideas are like circling, orbiting my head, and then I have to write, and I'm very much inspired. And then there have been moments of just completely nothing, moments of not even recognizing myself as a writer, and actually being okay with that.
What I find is it's so quiet. It's so quiet. I live in the countryside here in the west of Ireland. So my mind isn't as frantic and racing. So I did write. I have been writing a second novel, but it's a whole different thing. And you're very much living inside your own head at the moment, and in that sort of introverted space, maybe.
I think last April and May were probably the scariest months I've been through in a long time. And so I was very frozen. I had been writing a crime novel for a long time. And but eventually I think I thawed out a bit. It's very telling, isn't it, when you're going through such a global existential crisis. I think a lot of writers must be thinking, well, what am I writing about? You know, how can anything I write compare to what we're going through?
In the beginning of the pandemic, I was asking myself, you know, does writing matter? Does my writing matter right now? And I know that I probably can't write about the things I was writing about before, you know, that it will inevitably be different.
So yeah, in a way it was like the book came true for me. Even with the birds, you know, everyone over here in Ireland definitely became very interested in putting out bird feeders and looking at what came to their garden, because this was the only drama going on, you know. So no, my partner and I, who's sort of depicted in the book, many times we've sort of looked at each other and shaken our heads and gone, it feels almost like we've spent the last 10 years creating a lifestyle for ourselves that would sort of make us bulletproof in case of a pandemic, even though of course we never could have possibly known it.
There are some people I talk to that are bored out of their mind in this time, and I feel for them so much, because as writers and as readers, at least we can't be bored during this time, you know. It's just like, well, you got that shelf that you were going to read, all those pile of books that you kept on buying new ones to stack them even higher.
So genre and form are sort of very central to my process in a lot of ways. And so I think for me, fiction, where you can sort of experiment in terms of reality, and you can fuss with it in these various ways, I think is a good first step for me for like writing about a subject that I'm interested in broaching for myself. And then nonfiction is like the next step. It's like the step that I can take after I've sort of paved the way with fiction.
I'm used to writing very whittled kind of form within a poem, like compressed language into lyric poetry. So the adventure of this book in some ways for me involved exploding my own artistic practice to allow myself to explore something much bigger. And that's a little bit frightening sometimes for an author, you know.
Yeah, I particularly admire prizes like this that are multi-genre, that are open to all, and that there aren't, that we can move between if we want as writers. Some of the best writers I know don't know actually what they're writing. It takes someone else, like their agent or their editor, to be like, oh, let's market this as a novel. So actually, perhaps as writers, maybe we are less concerned, or from where the writing comes from, it doesn't as strictly dictate which kind of form or genre it is.
For me, poetry sort of, it comes along and I have to listen to it. But with writing fiction, I suppose you have that thing where you just have to sit down every day and put one sentence in front of another. So I alternate a little bit between the two. And so I've been working quite diligently on the novel. I think I have this sense of guilt that we have all this time now, so I should produce something.
As a fiction writer, I'm very interested in the possibilities of the form. That said, I love poetry, and I feel in relationship to poetry when I write. I think a lot about language and sentences.
If you write well. It doesn't matter what you're writing. You can describe anything in the world, and if you write it well enough, people will read it. And that's how I work as a reader as well, I suppose. I just want to read good writing, and I want to make the connections myself and not be told what it is or where I should be going with it or how I should understand it.
Well, I believe that writing is a form of integrity and activism. If you just look around, look at the folio long list and the short list. I mean, it's full of activism, isn't it? So, you know, this idea that the pen is mightier than the sword, I would agree with.
To tell you the truth, writing has been, I don't want to say a comfort, but it has certainly been part of my life that I have come back to, almost like a drowning person, like grasping a piece of wood that they find in the body of water that they're immersed in. I have gripped on to writing and have continued to write throughout all the strangeness of the past year and the sorrow and the intense grief. And I have never felt more lucky in my whole life to be a writer than I have in recent times.
We should always make good art. Good art can, like, you know, in some ways it can prevent some catastrophe, you know, by like expanding people's imaginations and like, generating empathy. Like, there are ways in which art is always important.
I believe so much in documentation and in archiving for the future generation, because I think that this is how we make sure that lessons are learned, and this is how we also empower future generations to make better decisions than we did.